Hello and welcome to this very special Google Plus Hangout. It's very special because we're going inside Syria, live inside Syria. Hello, I'm Bettina Lüscher from the World Food Programme. I'm the chief spokesperson here in New York at the headquarters of the United Nations. The World Food Programme, as you probably know, is the largest aid organization in the world. We're taking care of some 90 million people in over 70 countries every year. And as you can imagine, in some of the toughest places on earth. And one of those very tough places these days is Syria. In Syria, we're feeding some 1.5 million people under very tough conditions. The needs there are tremendous. People are suffering through a cold winter. Some 2 million people have been displaced within the country. Some 4 million people really need outside help. It's a huge task that we have undertaken together with all of our partners at the United Nations and with our partners on the ground. And today in this Google Hangout, we want to give you a real sense of what it is to do a humanitarian aid operation on the ground and give you a first-hand sense. We have with us a couple of wonderful people who are real experts in the field. I first want to introduce you to Deborah Amos. She covers the Middle East for NPR News. Her reports have been heard on NPR's award-winning Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Weekend Edition. And Deborah travels extensively across the Middle East, covering a range of stories from everything, the emerging power of Turkey. She's covered Syria, the plight of Iraqi refugees. She has won numerous journalism awards in her stellar career at National Public Radio, at PBS, and at ABC News. Welcome, Deborah. Unfortunately, Lara Setrakian of the news website Syria Deeply is unable to join us today. But we're very happy to welcome Karen Lee. She is the managing editor of Syria Deeply, a new media platform covering the Syrian crisis, where you really find firsthand amazing information about the crisis. She has lived and reported in India, West Africa, Europe, the Middle East, covering the 2011 Arab revolutions. She's worked for Time magazine, the New York Times, Bloomberg News, and traveled with the Clinton, Obama, and McCain campaigns during the 2008 elections. Next one up, Andrew Tabler. He's a senior fellow in the program on Arab politics at the Washington Institute, where he focuses on Syria and U.S. policy in the Middle East. As a co-founder and former editor-in-chief of Syria Today, Syria's first private sector English language magazine, Andrew had unparalleled long-term access to Bashar al-Assad's Syria, has lived for 14 years in the Middle East. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrew. And we're also very happy to welcome Irene Dankwa. She was selected from among hundreds of WFP supporters who have written to us and asked us questions about this. She's joining us from the UK. She's originally from Ghana. She lives in the UK, where she's getting her master's degree in public health and nutrition at the University of Southampton. So I think she probably is the smartest in the whole group, Irene. Cheering you on. Thank you for following us and being such a strong supporter. And now I would like to introduce you to my colleague, Abir Tefa in Damascus. She's really one of our rock stars. She will hate that I say that, but I really want to give her a big shout out. She is live from Syria, where she has been traveling the last week. She has repeatedly gone inside of Syria, and she can give us a first-hand look of what's happening on the ground. Before she joined WFP as a spokeswoman, she worked for the refugee agency UNHCR's, our real sister agency helping refugees. And before that, she worked for the BBC and ABC News. Abir, we're so grateful that you were there, that you made it. We had to postpone the hangout by one day because you were stuck by grounded planes. Give us a sense of what you saw during the last few days as you've traveled to the country.
Well, it was a long trip. We started on Sunday after I arrived to Damascus, and immediately we went to rural homes. We started by going to Homs City, and then we moved to rural homes where I saw WFP food distribution. I think that in general the situation is getting, of course, precarious by the day for many of these people who are displaced. This area, it's a village called Sokkara in rural Homs, which have received the poorest of displaced people from the governorate of Homs. I was told that 80% of displacement in Homs have happened inside the governorate. So people have just left the areas that became part of the conflict and moved to some safer areas. But this particular village has received a lot of the very poor people. I spoke to a lot of the people. It was very obvious their coping mechanisms have been exhausted. They've spent all their life savings. You know, some of them told me that they sold their clothes to be able to continue to live in displacement. And particularly, it was very touching. One of the women that was standing in line to get her food ration was saying that, and that was at 3 p.m. She was saying, I did not have breakfast today. I'm just coming because we ran out of food. And then we moved onward from Homs to, we drove to Tartus, where the city is pretty much calmer than the rest of the country. However, again, the number of people who live in the city of Tartus has doubled in the last few months, all because it's relatively safe. So it's received a lot of people displaced from other governorates. We met with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent volunteers and teams. We also went to food distribution. I went on visits to some of the families, and you know, home after home, you hear the stories. You know, some are displaced from Damascus, others are displaced from Aleppo. So a mix of people coming from every direction in Syria. And then after that, we flew to a small city in northeast Syria called Qamishli. Qamishli is in Hasaka Governorate, an interesting mix of population between you know, Muslims, Christians, Kurds, relatively safe, but you know, pure blackouts and power cuts. You know, and nights are completely dark. For the 4 nights that I spent in this city, maybe the power will come out for 1 or 2 hours, and then you are dependent on generators, and sometimes the generator will not work because there is no fuel. From Qamishli, we went to different areas in Hasaka, including Shaddadi district, and Shaddadi is under the control of the opposition. We were able to follow a WFP convoy that crossed the conflict line. Very interesting experience. Lots of negotiations with the community leaders, with WFP staff and the Syrian Arab Red Crescent volunteers, until we were able to cross this area. Once we entered the area, you could see again the desperation of these people. These people have survived a drought, a severe drought for 4 years. So they have not had any time to recover from this difficult situation, and now hit by violence. Most of them are displaced from the areas of Deir ez-Zor, and Deir ez-Zor is a very difficult area, hotspot area. We had an office there for many years because of the drought operation. Most of the staff that we have in Qamishli have been relocated from Deir ez-Zor, so they themselves are displaced. They brought their families with them, and they are operating out of Qamishli. And then again, back today to the got stranded for yesterday, or actually for the last 2 nights, due to you know, the fact that flights were not taking off for landing for the whole day. And then back to we stopped in Latakia, and then stopped today in the old city of Homs, and then back to Damascus. So that's in overall the summary of my itinerary for the trip in Damascus, in Syria.
What was your most moving moment? What was the thing that touched you the most?
I think there was a particular moment when I asked to visit one of the families at night, and I went to this home apartment, which has 47 people living in this apartment, and of course it's very dark. I was able to capture this on camera. My colleagues was using their mobiles to light a little bit for me the situation. And every room I've been into, I found maybe 15 kids lying on the floor in one mattress, and the father, the head of the household, would open the closet to show me that there is another child sleeping inside. This family has been displaced from Deir ez-Zor, And the father is telling me, was telling me that he has to wake up his children at 4 o'clock in the morning to queue up for the bakeries so that they can get their, some bread, which is basically what they are surviving on if they don't get their food rations on time. And they say it's actually hardly enough for a family of that size. So 4 o'clock in the morning, the family would go and queue to get, and they tell me that they need 63 packets of bread for a period of 3 days, which actually cost a considerable amount of money for this family, even though it is subsidized. So that, I think, was a very difficult moment, just to see it's cold, no heating, no fuel, no lights, and the kids are all sleeping in this small area.
Thank you so much for this first impression. I'd like to open it now to the panel for questions. Who wants to come in first? Andrew, go ahead.
No, I think Deb's actually, Deb has her hand up.
Okay, Deborah, here you go. And please unmute your phone.
There we go. How easy is it to move from the government-controlled areas to the rebel areas, and how often have you been able to do it? I just saw a figure that the UN put out that WFP has only got about 11% of food aid going into Idlib.
For the food that to go across into the opposition areas, that happens through, of course, coordination with SARC, the local community leaders. For us, some areas under the control of the opposition are definitely easier than other areas. Some of the areas are in the front line on the conflict zone, so it might not always be extremely easy for us to access these areas. But still, we do manage. As soon as there is lull in fighting, or some ceasefire, even for a few hours, we're able to send food to these areas. As far as the reaching food assistance in opposition areas, I think it's safe to say that at one point, the nature of control in this country changes. So one day, the area, for example, that I visited under the control of the Free Syrian Army, the residents told me that this area has exchanged hands at least 6 or 7 times. But for the time being, it's under the control of the opposition. So it is safe to say that at one point, or our distribution reaches at least 40% of the population in the opposition at a given time. But also keep in mind one thing, that 85% of the people that receive food assistance in Syria, out of the 1.5 million, are displaced people. So these are people that have left these hotspot areas and have decided to move to a safer area, be it in the government controlled, or even in some of these areas that are contested. Contested meaning it has been left. It's neither opposition, neither government. So I would say that it's not that low. It's not 11%. It's much more than that. It's probably ranges in the range of between 35 to 40% of the time we reach these opposition areas. WFP Food has reached areas in Rastan, in Tal Al-Ain, in Ras Al Ain and Tal Abyad. So these are very heavily areas that has been affected by the conflict. And we've reached at one point of time, maybe not every month, but there is consistently food that is going to these areas.
Very good. Karen, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm curious just to get your take on the Free Syrian Army or opposition fighters' role in perhaps aiding just the transition of the food. This is something that comes across my desk sporadically, as maybe the FSA could help. But when I was there, I was just in Latakia last month. I was in the mountains with various brigades, and there seemed to be no indication that this was an option or anything that they were thinking about. I'm not sure if this is something you can comment on, but if you can, just curious to hear what you saw or what you think, if you think that's a positive channel.
Most of the communications that and the negotiations that happen between the WFP and other aid agencies are happening through community leaders and through the Syrian Arab Red Crescent. So it's very difficult for me to give you a full picture on what is going on in terms of what is happening with the Free Syrian Army on that side. We do what it takes to get the food inside. We get food hijacked in some cases, and then we do open the negotiation channels with all parties on the ground to get this food back and to be able to distribute to the people who have been identified as the most vulnerable to receive this food. So all communication channels are open.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. And over to Deborah.
Sorry, I just wanted to. Hang on.
All good. We can hear you.
You can.
Yes. All good. Nope. Not anymore.
There we go. I just wanted to follow up on this 11% number. That's a UN number. They just put that out. And so I wanted to know if you knew if Idlib is a particular problem. Is it because the fighting is tougher in Idlib? Why has it been so difficult to get food into Idlib?
Any area that has heavy fighting, conflict zone, it will be very difficult to send food consistently or aid consistently to this area due to a lot of reasons. First of all, that the ability to secure food trucks and food convoys to go through these areas, it's not possible. Truck drivers are reluctant even to move through these areas. In addition, the ability to organize safe food distributions for people in these areas when there is conflict and military operations ongoing in these areas, of course, will impede humanitarian operations. And this is why people flee and become displaced. They become displaced because they are in search of safety and because they are in search of assistance. The family that I spoke to in Kamishli, who were displaced from Deir ez-Zor, the father has told me that he sent all his family out and then he was stranded for 40 days in this particular street in Deir ez-Zor, stranded in this heavy, gunfire. So it's not possible to organize safe food distribution, to send food to some of these areas. However, we do try every possible opportunity that we get with ceasefire or with reduction of military operations or the movement of the operation from one side to the other. We would try at least send food for at least one time or twice or whatever it can take. The time will allow us to do that. So I'm not contesting that this number. Probably it is right. I don't have with me the spreadsheet. I do have a spreadsheet of some of these areas where we're reaching and the areas we are having difficulty reaching. However, I have not seen Idlib on the list of the areas that are not fully accessible to us. I think it's mainly the areas that we're having difficulties with are some areas in Deir ez-Zor, probably few sections of the old city of Homs, some parts of Raqqa, some parts of Aleppo, but could be true.
Thank you. And I now would like to turn it over to Irene, who has a question from the UK. Irene.
Hello, Abia. In your earlier presentation, you talked about the fact that there is famine, there's drought in Syria, and considering the fact that the conflict has destroyed a lot of infrastructure and irrigation system, how is WFP working with agencies such as FAO in assisting farmers with food production and marketing to enable these farmers get household income, considering the fact that Syria's population has 46 dependent on agriculture?
Well, the area that I visited, Hasaka, is the grain basket for Syria. It has the highest production of wheat across the country. But the problem is that the farmers and the people in the rural areas that I've spoken to have said that they have not been able sometimes to harvest their crops because of insecurity. Actually, there was a survey that was done, or an assessment that was done by WFP and FAO in June of last year, and right now there is a revalidation of this particular assessment. And one of the things that come out is that 5% of farmers, only 5% that were surveyed, were able to fully harvest their winter crops, such as wheat and barley. 20% have reported complete inability to harvest their crops, and 75% reported losses of between 10 to 50%. So there is, the agriculture sector in Syria is certainly suffering. And in some areas, they tell me that the crops could be there and no one will be able to go out and collect it. Especially in some of the areas like Idlib, for example, when, as Deborah mentioned, it's an area of heavy fighting, lots of olive trees, but people do not, I mean, there is no means of marketing these, the agricultural commodities, or even sometimes harvesting this. So it's this is the time when people need the food assistance. I know FAO is working on some particular projects to help people with the agriculture activities, but you know, it's not I don't believe that. I think at this point what people need is the safety and security to be able to pursue this type of economic activity.
Thanks, Abia, and I think it also gives you a good insight of how we are working together across the UN with all of our partners, with FAO, with UNICEF, with the UN Refugee Agency, with the World Health Organization. All of them are doing their part to help the people of Syria. And it's a strong partnership, and we're grateful for the teamwork that is happening there. I would like to turn it now over to Andrew.
Hi, it's great to be here today with you. I've got a question. You know, in the areas that I've been in border areas of Syria, and certainly some of the refugee camps right inside the Syrian border, you know, frankly, you know, food was in very short supply. It was indeed in Aleppo and Idlib province, which Deb was talking about, where reaching those areas is difficult. If I understand you so far, you've said that it's difficult reaching those areas because of the fighting, but there's a real concern that a regime which uses all of its instruments against the opposition, you know, whether it's Scud missiles or airstrikes or artillery shells, that there's a real concern over the instrumentalization of aid, of politicization of aid. So I was wondering, what is the protocol that governs your activities with the Syrian regime? And second, how would you characterize the regime's degree of compliance with that protocol?
I think it's a constant negotiation process, whether it is with it's basically with all parties on the ground, including the Syrian government. We have had our share of difficulties. I mean, there is nothing that we can deny about that, but we also, I think, had some cooperation and collaboration with them. And they have been cooperative on some fronts. Our main partner on the ground is the Syrian Arab Red Crescent. We're working with them, and I have now, this is my second visit. I've visited many of the local chapters and the local branches of the Arab Red Crescent, the Syrian Red Crescent. And I have to say that they have done an incredible job, and the volunteers have done an incredible job to always try to push boundaries. They want to reach their people. They have their own you know, everyone has their own side of the story, and they want to push food to these communities who need assistance. In terms of the relationship between WFP and the Syrian government, it's, you know, we do coordinate on our sometimes on our movements to ensure and the security of the food trucks. We, as much as possible, try to keep a cordial and coordinating relation with all parties on the ground, be it the government, be it the opposition. That is our mandate. I mean, we are a humanitarian agency, and food needs to get to these people. Very difficult. I think each area also has a different dynamic, so it might not always be easy to generalize one particular experience to the rest of the country. But we're operating. Our staff, we have staff on the ground. We're allowed, I mean, we're given visas for our staff to enter the country. We are able to, I mean, we have been able today to move from today we moved over the last few days from to different parts in the country without being stopped. We passed through many checkpoints by both groups, and I think there is general respect for the fact that we have a humanitarian mandate.
Thank you. And Karen has a follow-up question.
Yeah, this question comes after I was in Latakia watching opposition fighters desperate for meat going out and getting a huge plate of birds and literally ripping the feathers off the birds and eating them. Latakia is generally thought of as being relatively stable now, especially in the cities. But are you concerned at the World Food Program about potential catastrophe in the next few months once, you know, should he fall, should fighting there really, really kick off?
I think in general, we assist 1.5 million people. The Syrian population is more than 25 million people. So, I mean, we are prioritizing really the most vulnerable people, and they are mainly displaced people. In terms of, we're upscaling and looking now forward to push our assistance to another million people. So raising pushing the bar to reach 2.5 million people. We do have definitely a lot of concerns. The fact that many of these communities have no access to, especially in the areas not under the control of the government. They don't have government services, shortages of fuel, of bread, of wheat flour is certainly something that's very worrisome. But a complete assessment of what is the situation like in the food security situation like in Syria is not possible at this point, because we cannot, it's a comprehensive project that needs, a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of reaching all areas on the ground, which is not possible. So I think that what we can do right now is to reach these people who need the assistance at the very urgently. Displaced families, I think people in shelters, people in living with host families, many public shelters around the country where people basically have no access to food, loss of economic activity. You also, one thing that you have to keep in mind is the nature of that we only provide food assistance to civilians. So basically the communities, vulnerable communities that are living in, whether it is opposition or government controlled areas, or even the contested areas that I mentioned. But certainly there are huge concerns that this country is going to face a food crisis if the conflict continues on further and further. There is agricultural production. We saw some of these farms flying today over Latakia. You see a lot of green areas, but how is the food moving around, and is it reaching all areas? If we're having a hard time pushing our food convoys to every part of the country, let alone about marketing all these food and agricultural commodities.
I think that gives a very good picture of how complex the situation is. I think it's also, once again, important to note that all of the money that has been raised and that has been donated from around the world is going into our aid operation. It is not going to the Syrian government. Sometimes there are questions being raised about that, and we deliver to the people who need the help. If I could chime in for 1 second, Abia, give us a sense of how the children are coping with this. There's a war, there's shelling, the kids had to flee, they don't sleep in their beds anymore, many of them are going hungry. Give me a sense of what you saw inside Syria or in the refugee camps you visited, how the children were coping, some anecdotes.
Well, many of the children that we saw, whether it is in the refugee camps or even here displaced inside Syria, have a very difficult time coping with this crisis. First of all, being away from home, and in addition, also, I think many of them recount lots of difficult moments, and they, you know, every time a child is asked to draw, he will draw the home that he's missing, or maybe, you know, planes, or, you know, tanks, and you will always ask them, what are you drawing? He said, that's the tank that was near my home, or that's you know, very emotional moments for these children. And I think that the fact that many of these children are not in school, so they are longing for these moments when they go to school. In particular, I think that whether it is displacement or being in a refugee situation outside the country, it's really having a hard impact on these children. Losing education years, losing years of their childhood is certainly something that you can feel in every conversation. And with every child that you talk to and you ask him, what do you want? Or you ask her, what do you want? They say, I want to go home.
Yeah, and I was struck by one of your stories that you shared with us a couple of weeks ago, when only one child in one of those schools in the refugees camps drew a clown. Everybody else, the kids all drew just war images. That was amazing and moving, and very, very sad if you think of that only one child draws a clown. I would like to turn it over to Deborah now.
Okay, here's my, listening to you talk about your work, I'm reminded of a piece this morning that was actually on Syria Deeply, and the suggestion was that the problem is not the lack of money. The problem is the lack of capacity. That even if you had all the money in the world, you have so many problems in the way that you can distribute. You're not able to get to many of the conflict zones. You don't really know, except in big, large numbers, you know, 2.5 million are displaced. You don't really know where the real need is, because there's no way to do an assessment. You don't have the capacity to do an assessment, and that the restraint on helping Syrians is not money anymore. And yes, it's great that all these people gave $1.5 billion in Kuwait, but it's really hard to think how that's going to help people who are sitting in an 8-hour line in Aleppo to get a piece of bread.
I will disagree with you on this, Deborah. Funding is an issue. The fact we have I mean, by March, we will have basically empty warehouses of food. And the reality is that we know where the needs are. We know, I mean, we're not going to reach there are over 25 million people who live in Syria, but there are huge needs around. I have to tell you that one of the things that I saw in my trip to Hasaka was that communities, you know, sometimes you're prioritizing, for example, the displaced families, and you're going through the host communities. In few cases, the host communities have hijacked the food trucks because they themselves need the food assistance. They say, we are in this. It's not because we left our homes, you're not giving us assistance. So the needs on the ground are huge. And no, we are able to assess the situation. Maybe, we're not going to reach everyone who needs assistance, but we are making it a priority to reach those people, the most vulnerable. And for the time being, we're giving the priority to these displaced families. 85% of the assistance goes to the displaced families who've left their homes. In terms of the capacity, I agree with you. I think the Syrian Arab Red Crescent as an implementing partner is overstretched, but we're right now working with many NGOs on creating checking their profile, neutrality, impartiality, geographical, reach, so that we are able to reach more of these communities that need assistance. In terms of the conflict areas and the conflict zone, food is reaching these conflict zones. It's not consistent. They are not being reached every month, but they are being reached as soon as there is this, slowdown or, lull in fighting, or brief ceasefire. And also, what is the from my personal view here is like, what is the point of doing a huge comprehensive assessment when we know what if the needs are 10 million people? Can we assist 10 million people? We are trying at this point to look exactly at where are the people that need this this assistance desperately, and these will be the displaced communities or people surrounded and are trapped in conflict areas.
Can I follow up for just 1 minute?
Sure.
You said that there would be new NGOs. There are very few. That's part of the problem. There's no partners, as you all say. Does the partners, do they have to be approved by the Syrian government, or can you decide who your partners are? And let me just do one so that you can answer both. I think the reason that I'm talking about assessments, not so much that you have to count everybody, but I keep walking into towns where I see 21,000 displaced, 14,000 displaced, and nobody's been there. And I think, okay, these are places where maybe nobody knows. Although I think they have been well reported, so it's been in the press. But there are still huge areas where there hasn't been distribution.
On the partners and the choice, the selection of NGOs, we have been given a list of a number of NGOs that we can work with, and we are right now checking the profile of these NGOs and checking whether they can reach the population that we want to be able to assist. We're checking neutrality, impartiality, and the geographical reach, like what I mentioned. But at this point, all options also are open. We are, opening up communication channels with all groups of people on the ground so that we are able to expand this reach. However, from the 110 NGOs that have been given to us by the government, we're looking at around 28 potential partners. Oh, you had one more question about some areas that have displaced people and are not reached. Yes, there are definitely some challenges in getting food trucks to some of the very difficult to reach areas in the country. So I'm not also saying that every displaced person in Syria is being assisted. As I mentioned, some people have fled from hotspot areas to other areas who have become also in the line of the crossfire. But our staff on the ground are able, and with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, we're crossing conflict lines. Not in every conflict area, but we are doing that on monthly basis.
And Andrew, now?
Concerning Deb's question about NGOs, I worked with NGOs when I lived in Syria. I've written a lot about them. I worked for a time for one of Basma al-Assad's charities. The fact is that we don't have any modern NGOs in Syria. We have charities, we have organizations which are registered as charities with the Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor, which operate something closer to NGOs. But those organizations remain under very tight scrutiny by the regime, to be honest. In fact, it was the lack of a passage of an NGO law that would allow for their independence, which has been demonstrated for the past 13 years. And on top of that, was a major reason why the first 5-year plan, which was backed by Abdullah Dardari, was not implemented. These are his words, not mine. Also, the Syrian Arab Red Crescent is indeed, in fact, a parastatal organization. It is headed by Abdul Rahman Attar, a friend of mine, but is a man who is one of the closest Sunni businessmen to the Assad regime. And I think that's an undisputable fact. The Syrian Arab Red Crescent, I would agree with you, and some of these organizations have shown bravery, and we have accounts of that from activists. But I'd like to put forward that perhaps the difficulty that you're facing in trying to distribute a lot of these materials is the fact that working through regime channels is extremely difficult when the regime in itself is fighting against what it regards as an insurgency. And so my question to you is, would it be useful at this point for organizations like the World Food Program and others to simply diversify their channels of aid, not to go through the Syrian Arab Red Crescent or through the formal channels of the regime, but to broaden and diversify the materials that come in to the country and that are distributed? Would that help reach some of these liberated or disputed areas of Syria?
On your first part of the of your comment, yes, these most of them, I think it might be a bit of overstatement to say they are NGOs. They are charity organizations, and but they do have the reach, and they are. We have already worked with a charity organization or a charity group in Homs, and we've seen that they have really done a good job in especially in a very specific situation, providing food assistance and helping the communities who are housed in public shelters. On SARC, you know, the headquarters of SARC is working in a sort of an independent manner now from the local chapters. If you look at the volunteers from Homs, for example, when I was there in October, when I spoke to them, they told us we lost many volunteers in the crossfire. Many of us were detained. We had our ambulances shot at. So I think that there is a lot of, sometimes there is a bit of injustice to the bravery of some of these SARC volunteers. They are, at the end of the day, people across the crossfire and the conflict lines. They are the relatives and neighbors and family members. And I think that they have all been impacted by the conflict. So I have, you know, even though my visits have been brief, but from the accounts of all my colleagues on the ground and from our own monitoring activity, I think that they have been doing, you know, an excellent job actually in trying to push the limits as much as possible and to get to the areas where food is needed. And in the area in northeast Syria where I was visiting this week, the head of the local branches of SARC are actually sheikhs and community leaders who are, you know, who managed to get us actually to cross through the front lines and be able to cross to the other side, because they have a good connection with all the parties on the ground, including the opposition and be it the government. In terms of diversifying our partners, it's something that I'm sure every UN agency aspire to, but at the end of the day, we are working here within a, you know, in a country that is a sovereign state. I mean, we have to work with what we have, and for us, it's important to try as much as possible to get food assistance and to work with the limitations that we have on the ground, and recognize also the challenges. And we admit that it's not an easy situation to be working in Syria. It's one of the most complex and challenging humanitarian aid operations in the world. And our communication channels are open. As a matter of fact, when I was in Hasaka last week, I mean, we received a number of charity organizations who learned about the fact that we are vetting and looking at the profile of different NGOs and charity groups, and they said, okay, try us. We want to serve these communities. So I think that all options are open, as long as we are able also to push to continue to provide for this vital operation inside Syria.
And thank you. And Irene had a question.
Hello, Abia. You mentioned that the children are traumatized. That means that there are some emotional needs that need to be met. So I wanted to know how WFP is working together with UNICEF in helping these children move from illness and low achievement towards health and maximizing of their potential.
I think in terms of cooperation in general between UN agencies on the ground, I've seen firsthand that there's a lot of coordination. You know, UNICEF, WFP, UNHCR are always moving together when there is an assessment that is being done there's kind of one agency would give an overview to the other two agencies, even if they were not part of the assessment or the mission. Many of the families that I have seen have been assisted by WFP through the food. UNICEF has provided the hygiene kits, and UNHCR has provided the mats and the blankets that I've seen in this very modest, actually very difficult houses, unfinished homes without windows, without doors. So the three agencies, and I'm sure that there are other agencies that are working hand in hand together. WFP is mandated with providing food assistance. So, with the limited ability of staff on the ground to provide this vital assistance to the 1.5 million people, we do coordinate with UNICEF, but I'm not sure that we evaluate that because psychosocial support, because it's not our mandate, but there's always this coordination in terms of even security movements. When there is always double checking. We're going, to homes. Would you like to join our mission? So there's always this coordination between agencies so that we maximize on our operations and are able to provide assistance to people at the multiple layers. It's not only food that people need to survive on. There is a shortage of fuel, no heating, there's no furniture, not even, a mat for people to sleep on. But I'm seeing that I've seen in many cases, in many homes, the vital support that's being provided by a number of agencies on the ground.
Thank you, Abia. And I would like to open the floor up now to some of the questions, the many questions we've received on Google Plus from all the folks who are following this program. One is from Agre Inter-Kimanye on Google Plus. What special humanitarian assistance do you give to pregnant mothers and nursing mothers?
At the moment, what we are providing is the food package, the food parcel that is given to every family on a monthly basis. There is not, up till now, no special, assistance for pregnant or lactating mothers or nursing mothers. But very soon we will be providing, a special nutrition treatment for some of the malnourished kids in some of the areas that we know are particularly has high malnutrition rates, even from prior to the conflict. So we anticipate now that the situation must have gotten worse, especially in these areas where they faced a lot of droughts.
Yeah, and if I just can hold that up here, if you can see me, one of the things we're going to give to small children is this plumpy sup. I always call it the humanitarian Nutella. It's a paste that tastes very good and helps little malnourished kids recover very quickly. So soon we will be handing out those here. Another question from Shakib Al-Jabri. I want to know why WFP labeled products being sold in Syrian supermarkets in regime-controlled areas.
I have asked about that, and actually in every operation where WFP is providing food assistance, there will be some of these food items that will end up on the market. But in particular for Syria, very limited amounts of food have shown up in the local markets. The reason is that sometimes people need something more urgent than food. I mean, maybe they need a medication, maybe they need, a baby milk, maybe they need something that's more urgent. So sometimes they would go sell, a portion of their food ration to be able to exchange it for something else that is very in dire need for the family. I've met myself in a public shelter, a father, a family with a father that has dialysis and he needs a specific medication. They told me that sometimes they had to sell one item from the food basket and, survive without it so that they can afford to get the medication to the father. But it is not a phenomenon that you could see across Syria. We have our field monitors are on the ground, because when we see that, it means it has an indication that we need to correct something. So it's not a wide phenomena at this point, and we don't see it except in very limited cases.
Thank you. And from Bill Lambers on Twitter, are you receiving a Food for Peace donation from the US? President Obama just announced donations. I can help out a little bit with that. The Americans have been, of course, among the leading donors on the humanitarian side. Overall, they have given some $365 million to the overall humanitarian aid operation. And of course, they join many other donors, the European Union, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Canada, various European countries, all of them. Generosity as displayed yesterday on Wednesday at the Kuwait summit is very good. Of course, many of those are still pledges, but we're very confident and hopeful that the money will be going in. I just want to stress that sometimes when you have like a big summit like the Kuwait summit and you hear these big dollar sums, those are pledges. Then the money has to come in, and then it takes a while before it actually materializes into food on the ground. It takes a while before it reaches as food on the ground. That is why Abir earlier mentioned that we're worried about what will happen with our food pipelines in March or so. Here, the next question, Justine McKinnon from Crisis Mappers UK. Is anyone utilizing crisis crowd mapping for situational awareness of food resources in areas that are difficult to reach? Crisis and crowd mapping.
I'm not aware of that.
That's fine. I was earlier joking that Andrew has a big map behind him, and we would go to him if there are any mapping questions. But I'm not sure he can handle that one. So let me take the next one here. Yes, Ronnie on Twitter, what are you doing for refugees outside Syria? Abir has been traveling to the camps. Tell us, Abir, what we're doing outside of Syria, which is extensive.
Well, WFP has launched an emergency operation to provide food assistance to refugees that have fled to neighboring countries, and that includes Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Turkey. And now we are very soon going to launch a food voucher project for Syrians who are in Egypt. Very vulnerable situation. Overall, there are around 700,000 people that have registered with or are awaiting registration with UNHCR. We're targeting 250,000 people in the neighboring countries at this moment, with a plan to continue rapidly upscale to reach 750,000 people by June of this year. We assist people through a number of ways. In some situation, when the market would allow, we will provide these people with food vouchers. And in other cases, like in some of these refugee camps, like for example in Jordan, we give people food rations, and UNHCR has installed these community kitchens so these people can cook and prepare their own food according to their own local taste. And in other cases, it's just the provision of these vouchers. In all of refugees living with host communities, they will get the food vouchers. And in the refugee camps in Turkey, they are getting the food vouchers. In some specific cases, like in the camp in Jordan or the new arrivals in Jordan, they will get the food parcels with dry food rations.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that's one of the new revolutionary things that that WFP is moving in, that we are hoping to use vouchers and electronic cards instead of handing out food wherever that is possible. So you basically see refugees or IDPs, if there are stores in the area, that they can get a card like this, and then they go to the local stores and get food up to a certain amount, and that makes it very practical. It's one of the new tools that WFP is using to help this up, to help people in need. I think this has been a really interesting session. I hope you learned a lot, and it was inspiring to you to help the people of Syria and to help the people who have fled to the regions outside of the country. I want to thank our panelists who have raised very good, tough, and very, very smart questions. I want to thank Abir, who looks remarkably well after spending, going on a hard road trip. I especially want to give a big shout out to all of the aid workers who are on the ground in the region or at the various headquarters of the United Nations all over the world. There are untold numbers of people delivering UN aid to the people on the ground, and to them a big, big shout out. I would like to thank also Twitter, Google+, and YouTube. You made all of this happen. You bring the world together in a world crisis, and we're grateful for everything you do to spread the word. If you want to do something, you can support our operations in Syria by making a donation at links which are posted now on Google+ and on Twitter. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can make a donation from the box on the right side of the screen. And just to give you a sense for that, for $72, that's, you know, dinner for two if you get lucky here in New York City. For $72, you can feed a family in Syria for a month. Thank you. Be safe. Take care and join us again next time. I'm Bettina Lüscher here from the World Food Programme in New York.